People who think they deserve other people's money, people who think they deserve something they didn't earn, and gentlemen. This is going to examine the claim a lot of Democrats have made it, and even some Republicans have gotten on the old stimulus bandwagon, unfortunately. I'm not going to name names, but if you followed it, if you followed this circus in the last year, you know who I'm talking about. But Nancy Pelosi, Hilda Solis, and former Iowa Governor Tom Vilsack, my former governor, an idiot of biblical proportions, have all insinuated and said with a straight face that more food stamp payments, more unemployment benefits, infrastructure spending, all of course delegated, laundered, and run by Washington, will create economic stimulus, will put the economy back on its feet. Like I said, they've said this with a straight face, and as far as I'm concerned, that's just another proof that this country is going straight down the toilet. Government can't create wealth, people. You don't have to have the IQ of Larry Summers or Walter E. Williams or Milton Friedman or David Henderson or Mark Perry to figure this out. Government doesn't create wealth, it only moves it around. It either has to borrow it from China or Japan, take it out of your neighbor down the street's pocket and give it to someone else, or they print it. They don't create wealth, period. So let's examine this claim using OMB historical data, and I'll have all the screenshots going by and all the links underneath. You can check this out for yourself, see if I'm lying to you. Let's examine this claim by some that more infrastructure spending, food stamps, unemployment, etc., will stimulate the economy. Adjusting for inflation, if we take a gander at federal grants to local and state governments, you'll see that in 1980 it was $227 billion. By fiscal year 1989, it had shrunk to $186.4 billion. The Marxist Democrat might say, aha, they're cutting funds to states for infrastructure and other items. However, from fiscal year 1990 to fiscal year 2007, right before the economy crashed, it had more than doubled even after adjusting for inflation to $412.5 billion. From fiscal year 2007 to fiscal year 2011, which ended September 30th, 2011, it was more than 24% the rate of inflation just in that short time frame. No lack of stimulus there. Let's move on to federal grants to states in millions of nominal dollars for highways. This is a typical Keynesian gimmick. Allocating federal dollars for infrastructure will create jobs and stimulate the economy. One could just as easily have the Pentagon order a couple hundred new attack submarines. That would create jobs too, using their reasoning, but modern leftists don't like that type of stimulus. In fiscal year 1990, the federal government was sending about $14 billion in aid to states for highways. By fiscal year 2002, that had more than doubled to over $30 billion. By fiscal year 2011, it had increased by almost 50% to $44.5 billion. No lack of stimulus there either. Washington wastes a lot of this money as well, using gobs of fuel excise taxes to fund public transit. Public transit, as I have documented elsewhere, see my Refuting Liberal Talking Points, Public Transportation is Great videos. Public transit, as I've documented elsewhere, is another boondoggle, largely because Washington decided to get involved in it back in 1965. In fiscal year 1990, less than $3.8 billion was laundered from Washington for urban mass transit. By fiscal year 2002, it was over $7.4 billion. In fiscal year 2011, it was over $11.7 billion or over $12 billion the previous fiscal year. No lack of stimulus there either. They're still doling out gobs of money. Again, a lot of that comes from taxes not related to public transit. It is not self-sustaining. Do you trust Washington to allocate funds the right way? I don't. This is rent-seeking. It's a waste of money. Urban development, or rather called urban renewal, is another favorite item Washington likes to buy votes with. Congressman X brags about getting taxpayer dollars from people in the other 49 states to build this and that. Sooner or later, something has to give. You can't keep going to Washington to pay for every local project. The highway bill is usually permeated with earmarks for downtown development projects that aren't funded by people in that particular congressional district, but taxpayers in all districts. So what good's it do to for urban transit? Taxpayers in Iowa to pay for urban transit in California. We don't use it. And I wouldn't go to California if they paid me. Since fiscal year 1990, nominal federal dollars going towards housing and urban development have increased by over 150%. The federal government has no constitutional role regarding urban development and housing. That is left to the states, but that hasn't stopped them from pouring money into it. Washington is trying to stimulate the economy by shoveling money out the door for infrastructure projects that state and local governments can't pay for because they couldn't restrain spending during the good economic times. Now they come to Washington, hat in hand, begging for money from other states to pay for their infrastructure projects. Relating the federal funds overall for capital investment and adjusting for inflation and including grants, that total has been more than 63% the rate of inflation from fiscal year 1990 to fiscal year 2011. No lack of stimulus there either. Even before the economy crashed, funds directed towards those ventures were still well over the rate of inflation, so Democrats and certain Republicans can't argue that it was starved of funding until the economy imploded. Nancy Pelosi et al. Think food stamps and unemployment will increase employment. Really. Even during previous economic downturns, such as 1991 and after the tech bubble popped in 2000, we didn't see this marked increase in food stamp consumption and spending. It's different now as we have people being so blatantly stupid as to suggest that more people on food stamps equals economic nirvana. Just since fiscal year 2007, food stamp spending in nominal dollars has more than doubled, yet the economy is still stuck in a rut. From fiscal year 1991 to fiscal year 2007, food stamp spending didn't even double. That's how insane this has become. Of course, some of the blame falls on George W. Bush and his Congress in 2002. The farm bill that passed that year made it much easier to get on food stamps, and guess what? When you subsidize something, you get more of it. Unemployment compensation, adjusted for inflation, has more than doubled just between fiscal year 2008 and fiscal year 2011. Do we have full employment yet, Nancy? Consider that between fiscal year 1991, which was a slow economic year, and fiscal year 2001, which was also slow, that spending was below the rate of inflation. Congress deserves some of the blame here as well. Originally, benefits typically lasted 16 weeks, but now the basic benefit period is 26 weeks. In the 50s and 60s, temporary laws provided extended benefits beyond the basic 26 weeks. Then a 1970 law made the extended benefits of 13 weeks a permanent part of the program. In recent decades, Congress has also enacted temporary programs to provide supplemental benefits for workers who have exhausted both their basic and extended benefits. In response to the recent recession, Congress passed extraordinary expansions of UI payments, such that benefits could be drawn for 99 weeks or nearly 2 years in many states. Child tax credit payments have absolutely exploded past the rate of inflation as well. I would assume Madam Nancy thinks child tax credit payments are a stimulus as well. And now for the grand finale. Has all this stimulus for state and local infrastructure, all these food stamps and unemployment benefits stimulated the economy? Keep in mind, a good portion of the GDP growth we've seen since Hussein took office is a direct result of government spending, which does not create wealth, as I mentioned earlier. It only moves it around. Unemployment among blacks was 13.7% in February 2009, Hussein's first full month in office. In February 2012, it was 14.1%. I guess all that stimulus isn't doing blacks much good. The number of people unemployed for 27 weeks or more was just over 3 million in Hussein Obama's first full month in office, February 2009. In February 2012, it stands at 5.4 million. Median weeks unemployed has increased from 11.7 in February 2009 to 20.3 weeks in February 2012. Average weeks unemployed has increased from 20.1 in February 2009 to 40 weeks in February 2012. Those who want a job now but are discouraged because they believe there is no job available has increased from 731,000 to over 1 million in the same time frame. Those who are unemployed and those who are working part-time because they can't find full-time work, this is the U6 measurement, that measure has actually decreased in the same time frame from a whopping 15.1% to a whopping 14.9%. All that deficit spending for that reduction. Wonderful. Private non-farm payrolls were at 110.26 million in February 2009. It took almost 3 years to hit that level again after all this stimulus. Perhaps government-mandated stimulus schemes don't work, you think? For the protectionists still stuck in the 1950s, believing that manufacturing is still the driver of this economy, manufacturing payrolls are still about 500,000 below the level they were at in Hussein's first full month in office. Apparently these stimulus schemes aren't much bang for the buck when one considers manufacturing. What about construction payrolls? It was arguably the hardest hit sector of our economy. After all this stimulus spending for all these infrastructure projects at the local and state level, all this money from Washington, construction payrolls are still about 1 million below the February 2009 level. Perhaps if the national debt was 20 trillion right now, we'd have full employment. You think so? It's obvious, even if these stimulus schemes did work, government is not the best actor to decide where the money should go. They're vote buyers. I don't trust them. I wouldn't trust myself with that type of power. Using Pelosi et al.'s reasoning, this economy should be a lot better than it is now, but it's very sluggish. The United States is in decline and has been for some time. It was declining rapidly before Hussein even became president. But he's keeping his foot on the floorboard. We are headed for a cliff. The only questions that remain to be asked are, does this country have enough intelligent people to get to the polls between now and November and nominate a person who has the will to do what needs to be done? We need a person who is willing to fight Congress's appetite for spending. I have no confidence in Mitch McConnell or John Boehner. They need to find a new job. We need people in Congress who are willing to make the tough cuts now. If we don't, the last question is, are you prepared for the coming economic collapse? Have a nice day, and don't thank me now for the warning.